week, I have three scriptures connected with my message. The first comes from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 46, verses 3 through 4. Listen to me, O house of Jacob, all the remnant of the house of Israel, who have been born by me from your birth, carried from the womb. Even to your old age, I am he. Even when you turn gray, I will carry you. I have made and I will bear. I will carry and will save. The psalm response is Psalm 131. O Lord, my heart is not too proud, and my eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me, but I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like a contented child that is with me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time on and forevermore. My third scripture is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 23, verses 37 to 39. Jerusalem, Jerusalem. I should add, these are the words of Jesus. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together like a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you are not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Have you ever given someone a nickname or a pet name? Names are a very personal thing. The way we choose to address one another often indicates something about our relationship. Throughout this month of August, our sermon series is looking at some of the different names or images used to address or describe God in our Bible. By the way, if you are out and about at Trinity, there is an artwork display that is connected with this sermon series, and it's on the display wall in our great room. So throughout this sermon series, it's the hope of the pastors that this will spark your imagination and inspire you to think more deeply about your experience of God, your relationship with God, and the way you choose to address God. Now, one of the things that I recognize about this process in this series is that some of the images that the pastors have selected might not be helpful to everyone. In her sermon last Sunday, Pastor Suzanne mentioned that the image of fire associated with God, particularly with God's Spirit, it wasn't attractive to her in her younger years, that it even repulsed her, partly due to her exposure to a church near her childhood home. The church was named Spring Branch Pentecostal Holiness Fire Baptizing Church. That is a mouthful. Honestly, I just cannot help but wonder how they got that all squeezed onto a church sign. Anyway, I recognize that the image that I've chosen for this week, God as a mother, that it's not one that everyone will find appealing, because not all of us were blessed with nurturing mothers. Some of you may have even had mothers who were physically or emotionally abusive or neglected you. Although I do hope that all of you had some woman in your life during your adolescent time that did nurture you and kind of assumed that role, stepped into that mothering role. But again, if you had a negative experience with your own mother, you might not want to address God as mother, and that's okay. The point of this sermon series is to reveal that both within our Bible and within our own lives, that as human creatures, we draw from personal experience of what we've seen and heard in order to develop a better, fuller understanding of our God, whom we cannot see with our eyes or hear with our ears. And that's exactly what happens in the psalm that I shared just a moment ago, Psalm 131. In a certain way, with what the psalm and this series do is a bit like incarnation, right? I mean, Jesus entered into human flesh in a specific time and place in order that we might have a fuller understanding of God. And as we in this sermon series examine these various images and names for God within Scripture, it can lead us to a fuller understanding of God. I'm going to hold up for you the cover of Trinity's bulletin this week. I don't know if you can guess who is on that cover, but if you can't guess, it is my mom and me. And that picture was taken on my mom's birthday shortly after my 9th birthday. It is my favorite picture of us together. More than any other, I think that particular photo captures the contentedness of my mom and me in each other's presence. I was a very shy and nervous child from as early as I can recall. Crawling into my mom's lap was always a place of safety and refuge and contentedness. It was this oasis of calm and peace. And so that photo, at least in my opinion, is a perfect visual representation of Psalm 131. Now, this psalm in our Bible is attributed to King David, but in the ancient world, it was very common for individuals to write under the name of someone famous for which they had great respect. In fact, many Bible scholars believe that Psalm 131 may have been written by a woman because it so perfectly describes the maternal experience. Some of you may remember Ruth Smith, who was our church secretary for a while. Less than a year after she joined the staff, Ruth gave birth to her daughter, Ada. Ada, it turned out, was less than enthusiastic about bottles. And so for several months, Ruth brought Ada to work with her every day. The crib was set up in the office, and I got to watch the way that Ruth and Ada interacted, especially as Ruth would very discreetly throw a blanket over her shoulder and chest when it was time to nurse Ada. Watching Ruth and Ada, like that picture of my mom and me, it always brought this psalm to my mind. It's remarkable to consider that a woman could have been the author of this psalm because, as I've mentioned frequently in messages in recent weeks, women weren't held in very high regard in the ancient world. They were more like property. So the fact that maternal imagery like this was included, imagery for God, was included in our Holy Bible is really quite remarkable. Now, Psalm 131 is part of a collection of psalms called the Psalms of Ascent. While they may have originally been written for different purposes, contexts, or experiences, these psalms were eventually edited together as part of a collection that became songs for the journey when ancient Israelites made pilgrimages to Jerusalem for ancient festivals, such as Passover or Pentecost. The temple was, of course, the place of God's presence, of God's holy habitation. Though we can't know for sure, it's entirely possible that this psalm was composed by a woman making this pilgrimage with her child as she reflected on what it was like for her to be in God's presence. As I've already mentioned, women had little value in the ancient world. In fact, when a woman married, she was not considered a part of her husband's family until she bore a male child, an heir, who would grow up and carry on the family name. Fathers had little contact with their children when they were young. Rearing children was the work of the women. It defined them. That's why we have stories like the one of Hannah in 1 Samuel. Hannah feels worthless and desperate because she is unable to conceive a child. She prays fervently for a son, and she vows that if God will bless her with a son, she will dedicate him to the Lord. That's the origin of the story that many of us learned as children in Sunday school about the boy Samuel who lives in the temple and hears God call his name during the night. Samuel is living in the temple because Hannah made that vow to God that if God would bless her to conceive and bear a son, she would return him to the temple and dedicate him to the Lord. Now, in the ancient world, a male child was the source of a woman's identity, security, and belonging. So imagine how strong that bond must have been as the mother nursed and later weaned this child around whom her entire world revolved. There would have been nothing that mother wouldn't have done to protect and provide for her child. So the psalmist compares her experience of being in the presence of God with the experience of her child with her. Her child doesn't need to worry about anything, and her child will be protected and provided for. This psalm is one of simple trust. It begins with 3 negatives that tell us what the psalmist is not like. They are not proud, they are not haughty, and they are not preoccupied with big things. There's no need, since they rest secure and satisfied in the presence of God, just as their child does against their bosom. The psalmist writes that her heart is not proud, her eyes are not haughty. Her heart has to do with our inner state, and eyes were more symbolic of one's engagement with the outside world. So both within herself and in relationship to others, the psalmist feels no need to overcompensate, we might say. She's making no effort to be or to prove herself as worthy or special. This is an attitude of peaceful confidence and contentment. I imagine all of us have found ourselves at some time in our lives in a position where we felt insecure and felt the need to prove ourselves capable and deserving. It's a horrible feeling that prevents us from relaxing and resting. It prevents us from living fully in the moment. As I've already mentioned, this poem in our Bible is attributed to King David, but may well have been written by an ancient unnamed woman. Now, consider for a moment the enormous power disparity between those two, right? It's kind of an A to Z thing, isn't it? A male monarch compared to a peasant mother. Those are real extremes. So this psalm assures us that whether you are a powerful person with great responsibilities and authority, or someone viewed as socially insignificant, on the lap of Mother God and the arms of God, you can be secure and relaxed and at peace, knowing you will be protected and provided for. Further, when the psalmist indicates they are not mentally occupied with great matters or marvelous things, the Hebrew there that translates great matters and marvelous things is used in other psalms to describe the works of God. It's a way of the psalmist saying that they don't need to try and take control of things because God's got it under control. God's taking care of it. If you were blessed with good and nurturing parents, you might recall those early memories, that time during early childhood when you didn't worry about any big stuff because you trusted your parents to take care of it, right? You didn't worry about the mortgage or the rent or whether there was going to be food on the table. You didn't worry about world events and turmoil. You just assumed that anything big and important would be taken care of by your parents. Finally, the psalmist uses this metaphor of being like a weaned child on its mother's lap. The word there for weaned has its root in a word that means complete or satisfied. So it's possible that the psalm is referencing an infant who is just nursed to his or her complete satisfaction, or it may be referencing a child more like myself in that photo with my mom. I mean, at that time in my life, I no longer sat on my mom's lap because I needed to be fed or changed or any of those things we do to attend to an infant. My only reason for being on my mom's lap at 9 years old was because I felt so loved and safe and secure there. On mom's lap, I didn't need to defend myself or justify myself, and I didn't need to worry about anything. I wasn't needy because mom had already attended to my needs. Friends, the message of this morning's psalm is that it doesn't matter whether you're 9 or 90. You can snuggle in to the presence of God and rest and trust. You can set your persona and your worries aside. You can stop ruminating about the stuff that you really can't fix anyway. On the lap of Mother God, in the presence of our nurturing God, you can simply be, which is an immeasurable gift. Whether you are a CEO, a retiree, a homeless person, a supervisor, or a kindergartner, to be in the presence of God is to be in a place of safety and rest. All of us need a place where we can simply be, confident that we are loved and safe and cared for. There is a place like that, friends. There is a place like that, and it has a name: God. So this week, when you have a moment where you are feeling scared or inadequate or vulnerable, take a deep breath and close your eyes and imagine yourself crawling into the lap of God. Imagine God wrapping her arms around you and enfolding you in her care.